Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us on another edition of the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. It's March 13th, Wednesday. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz. This was supposed to be a relatively quiet week around Ohio State football. The Buckeyes are off for spring practice this week. They don't return until the following Tuesday. The university's on spring break, but there is news around Ohio State football.
Yeah. Well, you want to share the news, or do you want me to?
I'm guessing most folks probably know it by now if you're listening to this podcast. But Tony Alford will no longer be coaching at Ohio State. He'll be coaching at another program in the Big Ten.
What program is that, Joey? What program?
It's
what are the uniform colors?
A little further to the north, I believe.
Okay.
I believe their colors are maize and blue. I believe it's Michigan.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, Tony Alford is making the unusual move to go from Columbus to Ann Arbor. There have been plenty of coaches who've gone back and forth, or Ohio State graduates, coach in Michigan, Bo Schembechler, was at Ohio State and coach in Michigan. Gary Moeller, Ohio State captain. Greg Madison came from Michigan at the start of Ryan Day's tenure, as did Al Washington, right? So it's not unprecedented. We've even had players do that. But for it to happen like in the middle of spring break, when spring practice has already started, that's weird, right? I mean, we didn't expect that. I actually got a call last night from somebody that was kind of hinting at this. And the other person and I were kind of like, well, I mean, in some levels it makes a little bit of sense, but it's spring break. I mean, the timing of it didn't make any sense. Well, it turned out that there was smoke to the fire, or fire to the smoke, I should say. And Tony Alford's gone. He's been, I think it's the second longest serving assistant coach on the staff behind Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson got there at the start of 2014. I think Alford got there 15, I believe. And, has had a lot of success. I mean, think about the running backs that he's coached. J.K. Dobbins and Travion Henderson now. He's had success. And Joey, we talked before, and you pointed out, it's kind of been peaks and valleys in terms of the recruiting.
Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I think on its surface, this is a little bit of a puzzling move, largely because you don't really see coaches changing sides in the rivalry directly. I mean, as far as I can tell, I'm not sure this has happened ever, a coach being poached directly by Michigan. Only a small handful of guys have even coached on both sides of the rivalry. But as you said, not unprecedented. But you look at his situation, I mean, Tony Alford has in the past tried to be a head coach, interviewed for the Colorado State job a few years ago, been at Ohio State for 9 years. Brian Hartline made the move to offensive coordinator last year. You bring in Chip Kelly. So in terms of career-wise where he's going to go, there isn't really an obvious move on staff. He's already the highest compensated running back coach in the Big Ten. So maybe this is a chance to get a little more money, maybe a chance to get a little more long-term security. His contract was expired, and that's the other thing that's unknown. We don't know how much he's getting paid yet at Michigan because they have not formalized this move, even though by by now Tony Alford has updated his social media accounts to reflect the change. But we don't know how much he's getting paid in Michigan. We don't know how much he would have gotten paid yet at Ohio State under a new deal. He made just over $750,000 last year, over $800,000 when you factor in actually over $900 when you start factoring in some of the bowl bonus stuff. So he was well compensated at Ohio State, and we'll find out how well compensated he'll be in Ann Arbor.
Yeah. He was not under contract. His contract had expired. I mean, it was not, so it wasn't like there's no buyout, none of that. It's, it's interesting because the timing makes it very interesting, right? Middle of practice. I mean, I shot a video of him the last week, and he's running drills with the running backs. I'm sure nobody thought at the time he's going to be gone in a week, especially going to Michigan, and that's the part that's kind of like rub your nose in it a little bit. Although, Michigan did not extend Mike Hart when Sharon Moore took over for Jim Harbaugh. And so, just throwing it out there, what if they just make it a trade and Mike Hart comes to Ohio State? Mike Hart's a highly regarded coach. I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no idea, but there's a quality coaches out there. There are others. Scotty Graham, former Ohio State player, is now at Washington, just joined the Washington staff. He'd been at Wisconsin. That's a name. I mean, look, it's Ohio State. They're going to find somebody that's good. That's not an issue. They're gonna be able to pay whatever they need to pay. It's a head scratcher in certain ways because the other part of it is Ohio State's loaded. They retain TreVeyon Henderson. They get Quinshon Judkins. You'd think this would be a running back coach's dream to coach those guys. Just signed a couple of freshman running backs. You have Dallin Hayden also. So it's a well-stocked room for now. Michigan's got Donovan Edwards, but they obviously lost Blake Corum. And Michigan as a program is certainly in transition. They lose Jim Harbaugh. They lose a lot of their staff. They lose the core of that national championship team. There's an expectation, especially with the brutal schedule that they've got, that they're going to be, it might be an uphill climb just to get back to the playoff for them. So that part of it's interesting too.
Yeah. In terms of the situations that they're going to be at, you would think Ohio State is more desirable in terms of who you're going to coaching, where they're going to be ranked in the preseason, how high the ceiling could be for the team just for this year. That to me, I think is the other puzzling element of this, but maybe it's more responsibilities in Michigan in terms of game planning, money. The financial component, I think, is interesting to look at here. I do think Ohio State has pivoted very well this offseason in general, where they're counting on plan A. That was the plan for Bill O'Brien to be the offensive coordinator. They pivot and hire Chip Kelly. That worked out well for them. So if anything, that track record, I think, should inspire confidence among Buckeye fans that I think Ohio State will be fine. The dilemma will be how quickly are they going to hire somebody? It's March 13th. Their spring game is in exactly 1 month. So even if you were to hire somebody quickly, you would think they might get to Columbus in a week or two. So I think that will be interesting how they manage this in the short term. Because look, there are two sort of questions here. How do you manage the remainder of spring practice? You have 13 practices left, including the spring game. But you also have more than spring practice. You have the recruiting window in the spring and summer, the fall season as well, just long term, what you want at that position coach level. So those are the two things they're going to have to weigh is how quickly do you want to make a guy versus how long do you want to take and make sure you take your time and get the right guy.
Yeah, who's going to coach the running backs, starting next week at spring practice? It's going to probably have to be Chip Kelly and probably with help from some GAs. And Ryan Day probably will chip in too, I guess. But again, it's not the end of the world. Spring practice is not. Quinshon Judkins has to get acclimated to the system, but I think TreVeyon Henderson can certainly help him with that. Dallin Hayden can help him with that. So, it's not catastrophic by any means, but it's not also ideal. You want to have your position coach in place.
It would be helpful for them if they had almost Todd Fitch still on staff as on their support staff. He left for a similar role at LSU before spring practice. But if you had somebody like Todd Fitch on staff, you could have Chip Kelly coach running backs in spring and Fitch coach quarterbacks as sort of a temporary move. Although to me, if you're Chip and Chip Kelly, I think you'd want to be coaching the quarterbacks primarily your position in your group. Right. So maybe I think you need somebody who could be maybe a stopgap coach. Ryan Day was working with the running backs in the first week of spring practice, so maybe he could coach the running backs as well. It's I think that's less important to me how they handle spring practice 3, 4, 5, because in the long term, the 2024 season, that's what's more critical, I think, is getting the right guy in place rather than managing spring ball. It's not ideal, but it's certainly, I don't think, crippling to what you want to do. But hey, they bring in Chip Kelly. They're making some tweaks with the running game that they talked about in week 1. I think you would ideally like to have your full allotment of position coach, but again, not I think too difficult on them big picture wise.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I guess in hindsight, it is telling that they did not extend his contract, right? I mean,
they have not provided updated contracts for anybody on staff, because he's not the only one. Although they did announce there were certain guys like Tim Walton and Larry Johnson. They did announce that they had extended their contracts. They haven't provided those as in response to some records requests, but they've at least acknowledged those moves. They haven't acknowledged Justin Fry either, for what it's worth. But that's sort of where they're at with a lot of these things. They haven't actually disclosed the compensation packages for any of these guys.
And now you kind of go back and think, well, what did Ryan Day say about Tony Alford during this last season or whatever? Was he complimentary of him? Was he this, whatever? I don't remember Ryan Day commenting on the job that Tony Alford did. I'm not sure he was asked specifically. But the fact that he wasn't extended, I think tells you something. I mean, I think sometimes actions speak louder than words or no words. And so they did extend Larry Johnson,
for 2 years, for what it's worth too. And they've typically done 1-year deals with Larry. Right.
That kind of was clinched when on signing day, right? The famous phone call, and I would have thought, honestly, when Tony Alford, or when Travion Henderson came back and Quinshon Judkins transferred from Ole Miss as an all SEC running back, that would have been kind of like, okay, that's the clincher. Tony Alford's coming back. Obviously not. For Michigan, they're touting this as a great coup. They stole Ohio State's running backs coach. Well, that first of all, he wasn't under contract, so you're not stealing it. It's like getting a free agent essentially, as opposed to getting somebody in a trade, right? I mean,
he was going through spring practice. I think it's fair to say that they poached him off Ohio State staff, because if not for them, I think he would still be under contract, or a new contract would be coming soon, most likely.
Well, he was certainly working at Ohio State with the idea that he would be retained, right? I mean, he's not going to go through the trouble of coaching the first 2 days of spring practice if he was going to, knew he was leaving for Michigan. I mean, nobody would have wanted that situation. So this had to have come up quickly. Michigan is certainly touting this as a big, get for them, and it probably is. But I just can't, the guy go back to the timing. It's just such a weird thing to happen right now. I guess it'd be weirder if it happened not spring break, if it actually happened like next week, and he's there on a Tuesday and gone on a Wednesday. That would be stranger. You don't know. I mean, he's been at Ohio State a long time. As you said, he was up for the Colorado State job a few years ago. That was the job that went to Steve Adazio. Urban Meyer put in a word for Adazio, who's his good friend. Alford's 55, and that's an age. If you haven't gotten a head coaching job by then, probably not going to happen. I'm not saying it couldn't, but that ship may have sailed for Tony Alford, and I'm sure that he would have loved to have been a head coach, and he might have been a successful head coach. So he might be deciding that, okay, I'm going to maximize what time I have here, and if it's at Michigan, it's in Michigan. But he's an Akron guy. He's born in Akron, and so I don't think fans get totally bent out of shape about assistant coaches. They come and go so much. It's such a transient position. But I don't think that's going to – I think that any chance he had to kind of be thought of as a Buckeye for life is gone now.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I don't think people typically begrudge assistants for leaving. I don't think any Ohio State fan was turned off by Bill O'Brien going for Boston College for a head coaching job. But the fact that it's largely a lateral move, he's going to be Michigan's running backs coach and a run game coordinator, sort of that extra title he's had at Ohio State in the past. He's leaving for it's a lateral move in terms of position, in terms of responsibilities, largely, and the fact that it's Michigan. I think,
right.
You look at other schools.
That's it. It's Michigan. If it were any other school, if you were leaving for Michigan State, people would say, let's say it was a promotion even at Michigan State. People say, okay, whatever. Just the idea of an Ohio State coach going to Michigan after Michigan wins the national championship, after Michigan's won the last 3 games, that's the thing. Because Ohio State fans want to think that this is in these guys' blood, that it's inconceivable that anyone at Ohio State would ever even consider working at Michigan. I mean, that's the way a fan thinks. I'm not saying that's the way they should think or the way it's realistic, but that's the way a lot of Ohio State fans think. How dare anyone even consider going to Michigan? Well, here's your running backs coach going in the middle of spring practice to Michigan.
Yeah, it's. I think if you were to look back on a scenario a couple years ago where maybe Tony Alford does leave for that job at LSU, I don't think the reaction is quite what it was today with him going to Michigan. And same goes when Notre Dame hired Marcus Freeman and they were looking at a lot of Ohio State assistants. If he had returned to Notre Dame, I don't think people would have felt the same way. But it's Michigan. And even some of the reaction of players on Twitter, like Denzel Burke retweeted the news and put a bunch of emojis with thumbs down. I mean, this is a moment in the rivalry where tensions are high. You have Michigan's winning the national championship, the whole sign stealing saga. They've won 3 in a row at Ohio State. So I think you added those elements. It's why it feels, I think, probably to some of these guys more personal than if he had just left for another Big Ten job, for a job in the SEC or something like that. But it's sort of the one place I think that's going to leave people in Columbus with a bad taste in their mouth, and certainly in that locker room, which I think in some ways is unfortunate because he did a lot of good things that Ohio State fans should like. He was a good running backs coach. 2 out of the 4 best historical rushing seasons by Ohio State backs, Ezekiel Elliott and J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins, who became the first to rush for 2,000 yards in 2019, were when Tony Alford was the running backs coach. So did some good things at Ohio State that shouldn't be overlooked. But I do think the destination that he's going to in Ann Arbor is going to ultimately sort of overshadow a lot of things that he did, at least in the minds of fans and even a lot of in the locker room. Yeah,
and obviously Ohio State plays Michigan the end of November. This will be just another kind of another little thing that adds to the rivalry. It's not going to be anywhere close to the top of the list, but it's going to be on the list. Stick it to Tony Alford, right? That's one of the things. Again, down the list, but on the list.
Yeah, it'll add even more intrigue to late November. I don't know if there'll be anything else to write about that week, but there could be a few different things to write about.
might be some angles that week.
Yeah. Well, as always, thanks for dropping by and listening. This was a sort of a quick recap of the news of the day on Wednesday with Tony Alford set to leave for Michigan to be their running backs coach, leaving Ohio State after 9 seasons. This is Joey Kaufman. That was Bill Rabinowitz. As always, make sure to download, follow, subscribe to the BuckeyeXtra podcast on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, wherever else you get your podcasts, and visit us as always for the latest at dispatch.com/sports. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the BuckeyeXtra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.
Just going to run this dog to see if we can find any type of human remains that are left.
Listen to Where Secrets Go to Die, The Disappearance of Derek Hennigan. From the Detroit Free Press, a new podcast set in the woods of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Available on Apple, Spotify, Freep.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.